people's emotions matter. And it sounds really, what does that really mean? Actually, it's okay to have emotions, whether visibly or not, and just being attuned to those emotions and state of people. And I've always been quite intuitive about reading people, in terms of when they come into a room, you can sense if they're flat, excited, you just pick it out. And I suppose later on, I learned a lot more about that, in terms of being body language and everything else, and just being more mindful of that. And I think that's been quite a big lesson for me. And I wish I'd learned that earlier. I've been observant of, whether that's in teams or customer clients type of thing, being more aware of almost what's been going on in their world beforehand, and just being a matter in the context of emotions.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining me today for the first episode of a mini-series that will be running for the rest of this month on resilience, what it is, why it's important, what leaders can do to ensure their teams are and stay resilient. One of the key features of the modern workplace, especially in the last few years, has been change, uncertainty, economically, socially, culturally, and of course the ongoing effects of the pandemic, which are hopefully much less than they were even a few years ago. In that kind of context, resilience is so important. It's something all leaders should be thinking about. And you may also remember last year we did a series on burnout. The growing prevalence of issues like burnout, stress at work, all have an impact on productivity, team happiness, morale, staff engagement, everything that a leader or manager is going to be thinking about, is going to care about. So in that context, things like resilience and building resilient teams have to be front of mind for any effective leader. With that in mind, my first guest for this mini-series is Julian Roberts. He has recently written a book called Weathering the Storm, a guide to building resilient teams. He's an executive business coach, and his purpose in the world is to help individuals and organizations to unlock their human potential and cultivate that resilient mindset. So he's got some great insights to share on this idea of resilience. We're going to kick off with what it actually means. We'll talk about what leaders can do, some strategies, some tactics to not just help their people become more resilient, but maintain a resilient team, and the red flags, the warning signs, things to look out for when perhaps your team needs a bit more support in this area. He's also got some excellent leadership lessons from his career in the food industry and more. So it's a great episode to kick off with. Really enjoyed this conversation as well, and I'm sure you will too.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Julian, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show. Lovely to chat with you again as well.
Good to see you, David. Yeah, it's good to be on the show, actually. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, appreciate you being here. And yeah, over to you, really. Push you in at the deep end, kick us off. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career so far, your background, if you like, what your business does and why you do it.
Yeah, I'm an executive coach, which I'm sure people have heard of, but perhaps don't know what that really means. But I work, and my purpose is to help humans unlock human potential. That's what I'm all about, and create resilient cultures and mindsets. So there's sort of two key things I go after in anything I do. I've been doing that for 7.5 years. So I work with individuals, I work with teams, I facilitate large groups, I do all sorts of things, webinars, anything, and jumping on podcasts and sharing about that, and also writing a book about it as well. So that's me in terms of what I do now. In terms of prior to that, I was 20 years in the food industry. Worked for organizations like Heinz and Yoplait, where I led sales teams and had the privilege and of working with people like Tesco, Walmart, Asda, and everybody else in between that, and sort of done that for 20 years. And I loved it. And I loved the whole, working with retailers, that they are challenging, but also the strategy side of things, driving sales, developing businesses, going to new routes to markets. And then in some ways I bring all that into my coaching world as well. And I do a lot of business strategy with clients as well. And I suppose the reason for the switch, because obviously I did a career switch 7.5 years ago, is that as much as I realized that I love strategy, sales, and sort of new markets and everything else, it was that when I reflected on, where was I performing at my best? Often a client, I asked a client actually, what's happening when you're performing your best? Is when I was working with people, the teams, and when I was actually, engaging my teams, and I realized I had this ability, something unusual, that I could spot talent in people, but also this ability to unlock that talent. And I had like a coaching style, and I realized actually that's like a coach. And so I sort of retrained as a coach, did all my various qualifications, ICF sort of accredited, team coaching, NLP, and ultimately a psychology masters as well, because I really want to understand a bit more about the human brain. So that's me really. So but I always believe all my experience prior to that informs me today and helps me with my clients as well.
Quite a varied career then, I guess. I don't think we've had anyone on before who's spent that much time in the food industry, or any time in the food industry, actually. My memory might be failing me, but I don't think we have. So, what's that industry like? From the outside, the whole world of retail, especially in sort of the supermarkets and the food area, it feels quite cutthroat and stressful, but is that fair or not?
Yes, it is. I think that it's evolved in the time I've been there. I think at the early days, it was incredibly cutthroat, and you had, and Tesco were, at those times, many years ago, were like bullies and used their power massively in terms of to influence and impact your brand. But I think that has certainly changed, and certainly within Tesco, I've gone on far more collaborative and seen the benefits of working in a more collaborative way. And there's sort of the demand there. I think there's a high level of demand, there's a high level of speed and pace. I worked in salad at one time as well, where you've got 5-day shelf life. And so the turnaround is super quick, super responsive, through to selling, a tin of beans with a 2-year shelf life on it. So slightly less responsive. But even so, even though the product might have longer lasting life, when you hit the shelf with a new product, you are judged very, very quickly, and whether that's going to make it and carry on. But there is a lot of excitement with it, lots of innovation. I think I quite like that pace, and working with retailers and getting that sort of energy through, and launching brands, not working with them on own label. Own label is quite interesting because you get very much embedded in their strategy, embedded in what they're about. I work with M&S, and I respect M&S because I know the process they go through to get food into their supermarkets. I respect their integrity. I respect their innovation because they're incredibly innovative, but they also push their suppliers. And when I was working with them, they really pushed me, or pushed our organization to really come up with really interesting products for them, or pushing the boundaries of within that sort of sector. It's been a great journey, quite challenging at times, but very rewarding as well.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, particularly the fact that it's getting better. And I wonder what drives that. Because it's easy to say, oh, it's COVID or Gen Z or millennials or whatever. People are buying different things, or they care about different things. But at a strategic scale, I wonder how much that is true.
Well, a lot of the change in terms of how retailers work with suppliers came through a grocery code that came in. I can't remember the exact dates, to start helping retailers to behave themselves in essence and not to abuse their power. So that probably was one aspect, but there's also the probably realization that actually if you collaborate with people, you get far more out of it, and I've dealt with buyers who, have been incredibly collaborative, and I want to give them a lot more and help, and my business will do a lot more for it. But when somebody's really difficult or not engaging, you start to get a lower motivation to try and help them. And I think there's that realization, and, there's always those buyers who are not very good or engaging or poor communicators, like in any industry. I mean, it's always that. But I think it's the realization, if you collaborate, you get far more out of things, and insights and innovation as well. Because, retail is all about, trying to be ahead of the curve, creating innovation, new products, new own labels that will excite their consumers and their customers. And so, that's how it's really changed.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear it. There's definitely a lesson there for leadership as well on collaboration. Perhaps we'll come back to that.
Yeah, well, it's something I obviously do. I create collaborative type of ways of working. That's what I do. Yeah. So it's one of my things I've realized actually it's the way to go about doing business. And that's even with the clients I have now. I even have this phrase. I talk a lot when I'm not, I don't pitch. I have a horrible word, pitching. Feels very salesy. But when I'm in conversation about a project with a client, I say, let's co-create this. I've got an awareness, I've got a skill, I've got experience, but you understand the problem better than I do. And then let's work together on how we can solve this in terms of going. So I try to create that sort of, even a collaborative way of creating the solution. So I don't come in with it, I know it all. This is the way to do it. Actually, I want to use your insight to try and help me navigate how I'm going to help you facilitate this thing or create a program for you. So I co-create.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think it's a good approach for leaders, for managers as well. I'm sure from our previous conversation, I know we've both worked with the type of manager who makes that relationship quite adversarial, shall we say. And I think it's fair to say the results that they will achieve they pale in comparison to if they'd taken this sort of collaborative approach that you're talking about. That's leadership lesson 1 for the episode. You mentioned your book. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I launched it in September. Yes, it's been a bit of started in November last year and launched it in September. So it's called Weathering the Storm, a guide to building resilient teams. So it's my passion of taking resilience, which I've sort of got attached to 5 or 6 years ago prior to COVID on an individual basis, and then started to then translate that into working with teams. And I've just literally taken my experience of working in the food industry, of my own leadership, my own failings, learnings from all that, working with clients in terms of building that team resilience, looking at the research around it all as well from a psychological point of view. And then I interviewed about 25, 30 leaders as well, got their insights. And I also have a podcast, and I got some insights from some of the guests I had on my podcast, and I've brought together a guide. It's more principle driven. I'm not into, just having I don't think processes always works in that context, because, I think there's always an assumption of a process, will work for everybody, but it doesn't, because the context is different. And, mine's about principles that you can incorporate within your own world of your organization. And so that's what I've done, and very passionate about it, and it's out there now.
Nice. Yeah. And so resilience, we're going to talk about that quite a lot in this episode. I mean, first of all, let's define the term, because I think it's one of those things like authenticity and vulnerability and all of these other words that I think they're in danger of being overused a little bit, especially the social mediaization of it. Is that a word? It is now, in recent years. So before
it's a great word, Dave.
Yeah,
it's a great word.
It is a word now. So before we go any further, what does that word, what does resilience mean by your definition and from your experience? And then why do you think it's so important for the workplace, for leadership, for life, the universe and beyond, all of that sort of thing?
Yeah, and you're right. There's a lot of resilience banded about, and I think COVID probably even more so. Let's about being resilient. And we all have a different view on life and a different view on the world. And, I look at it from a perspective of we all face uncertainty. And I think that's quite an obvious thing to say to people, but it is to get the reality. We all have failure in our businesses, our organizations, and we also have a lot of change. Change is just consistent, seems to be at the moment in every shape and walk of life. So for me, resilience is about how you navigate those uncertainties, failures, and change. And it's, uncertainty is putting things in place that will help you keep you anchored in that moment. And I talk a lot about being anchored in a purpose, whether that's personally or from an organization point of view. Because despite the uncertainty, you can be certain of your purpose and where that goes, and it anchors you and anchors a team, anchors an organization. So that's one aspect of it all. The failure side for me is, and it sounds very cliche, is that viewing failure or reframing failure as feedback, and almost an opportunity to learn. And I think for me, resilience is that important thing about what did you learn from that moment when you got knocked down, things didn't go quite as expected. What's the learning in it? And we live in such fast pace. We don't spend enough time reflecting and pausing and learning to see what next really. And a learning individual or learning team is for me what drives resilience in that sense. And then the whole sense of change, how you deal with change, and the emotional side of things that come with that, because there's a lot of emotions around that. So that for me is what I would say resilience is that ability to learn, get back up and navigate it. Yes, there's elements of grit, determination, but I think that for me can become a bit toxic. And I think we've got to be careful of almost what I call the toxic resilience, where, you just got to keep going and keep pushing through and work long hours and, don't worry about the boundaries of life, of work and personal life, and suppress all your emotions and what. I think that to me is toxic. I think you've got to be aware of all that and be careful, because otherwise you end up at this point of burnout, and nobody's good in a context of burnout. So yeah, that's my view on it anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially that potential toxic side of it. And it makes me think every time as well of that kind of the entrepreneur influencer type, get up at 5, work till midnight and all that nonsense. And then I'm sure they see that as resilience, and I don't think it is either.
No, and I think, things in life, you've got to work hard. I think there's an element of, you've got to work things, unfortunately social media almost flips that away, that if you do these 3 steps, you will be successful. And that's just absolutely rubbish. I think there's an element of working hard, but it's also perhaps working a bit smarter, and being mindful of taking breaks, mindful of your team's emotional impact of the change they've just been told about something, and it might affect them, being aware of that, giving some time out for things like that. And I think it's being far more aware of that we're human beings in this context. We're not machines.
No, absolutely. I think even like that working hard versus working smart, that whole working hard concept, I feel like that needs redefining as well, because I don't know, does someone who has the expertise to do a really complex piece of work in 2 hours, are they working less hard than someone who doesn't have the expertise and takes 2 days? And there's that, I don't know. I mean, when we think about things like productivity and efficiency and words that we're hearing that our economy in this country, for example, is not great at, it does make me think maybe there's maybe not a national level, but a grander level reframe required.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I really like the aspect of learning that you worked into that definition as well. Because I think, again, like there's something in there in resilience that we don't always think about, but you're absolutely right. Like, it's not just getting up after you get knocked down. It's examining what you've learned from why you were knocked down and what you can do differently next time. And that makes you more resilient in the future. And I think we forget that sometimes as well. So yeah, great definition. Thank you. And then the last one I'll offer as well is the whole keep calm and carry on, which is very British. But I think that's like the epitome of most people's understanding of resilience, isn't it?
Yes. No, I know it can be done in a jokey way, but again, that's not helpful. it's not helpful because it doesn't take in consideration that we're all, any point in our life, we're all at different levels of capacity, emotionally, physically, mentally. And, and I talk a lot of this about in my book about, I work with a group of rowers, female rowers who were looking to row around Great Britain. And we talked about helping them. I was working with them, not from a rowing perspective. I had no idea about rowing, by the way. No expertise. It's more about I was building team sort of resilience, mindset, dynamics, team cohesion. I was working with them in that context for about 12 months. And we did this, we got them to create this thing where on a daily basis, we tried to do it 3 times a day during when they ate sort of together, where they would sort of check in on each other. And it's a helpful thing to do, certainly when an organization is going through huge change and stuff. And so each of them they'd do a number between 1 and 5. 5, you're feeling on top form, you're great, you're on it. You feel you've got loads of capacity. 1, that potentially you're feeling sick. This is on the boat, by the way. You might feel sick in an organization, who knows? You're feeling sick, you're feeling tired, you're low energy, you're hurting, whatever it may be. So you'd say your number, I'm a 3, I'm a 4, and a very quick, expand a bit more about what that means. And what it did as a team, they think, oh, right, there's somebody's at a 1 here. Why don't you just take a half day out, just resting, and we'll carry the load. And it's a way of just very quickly checking in on people and then adapting the team. It's something they do in the airlines and on long haul flights. The cabin crew will gather throughout through the flights and just checking in each other and see who's got the capacity to keep going, or who's feeling a bit tired and needs a bit of a break. And it's just being mindful that sometimes some people have got more energy at certain points in time. That's okay. And you're just managing it between you rather than thinking, oh no, we've all got to carry on. Well, no, actually, Davey's not feeling great. He's just going to take time out. He's not going to row today or this half day. We're going to carry his load. And that's it. That to me is how you work as a sort of creating sort of resilient sort of processes within a team.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it really speaks to the power of a team, isn't it? I mean, and that's the whole point of having more than one person, is so you have the ability to do things like that and spread the load, manage the work, all that sort of thing. And yet it's surprising how few teams think like that or do that.
Yeah. And I think it comes, as we all know, all these things come down to leadership, and it comes down to leaders being, I suppose, vulnerable with that. Because in some ways that the skipper of this team would have to go, do you know what? I'm not feeling great myself today. Actually, I want to step out and it's been that vulnerability, and that there's more power in a leader role modeling something than telling them or going on a course than anything else. And I think that's where, if the skipper or the team leader goes, do you know what? I'm feeling a bit like not great. Can somebody else take the lead on this meeting at the moment, or whatever it may be? Context of that is really quite powerful.
Oh, 100%. And that comes up time and again in nearly every topic related to leadership is modeling the behaviors you want the team to display, isn't it? And I think, I made the flippant comment about keep calm and carry on earlier, but I think maybe it's a myth of resilience as well, but it's definitely a myth of leadership that you have to be seen as like the strong one, in inverted commas. Like, you can show no weakness. You can't ever admit that you're not feeling great, or that you made a mistake, or that you don't know what you're doing. You've got it's like the fake it till you make it thing as well. There's so many cliches coming out, and I hate them all. But it's that whole thing, isn't it? It's that misconception of what a leader needs to look like and how they need to behave. And yet most of those leaders who think that's the way they need to do it, if you ask them, like, what behavior do you expect from your people, from your team in that scenario, they would never say that. They say, no, I want them to tell me if they're having a problem, or I want them to tell me if there's been a mistake or an issue, so that we can deal with it as a team. And so you flip that back and you're like, okay, well, why don't you do that yourself then? And usually the response is, oh, good point. Yeah. So that leads into the next question, really, which is, if you had to pick that one myth of what it means to be resilient, what do you think that myth would be?
I think there's a myth around that people would say that some people are more resilient than others. I mean, in the point in time that's probably true. Where that comes from is that saying, oh, they're just more resilient than that person. Because I believe, and there's a lot of evidence for this anyway, that resilience is like a muscle, and you can exercise it, you can develop it, you can grow it. And I think that's the perspective to have on it. Now, somebody may be more resilient than you because they've been growing their resilience and seem to get through those challenges more so than you at that point because they've just done some more personal development, or they've been tested more, in a sense, as in they've had some situations that they have to sort of have learned from that enable them to be more resilient. And that thing is important, is the learning piece, and that because often people do go through some challenges, and I bet some people have gone through we've all gone through COVID. I bet some people have not learned a thing about it. I think I would hope a lot of people have, but from an organizational point of view, I think some people still haven't learned it. They've just carried on, and it's all put back to normal now-ish. A few little tweaks there, but they're just carrying on. So that's the myth for me, is that you can develop and grow your resilience, and within a team as well.
Yeah, I like that. And so, I mean, follow-up question: do you think, or how much of a role do you think the context plays in that? So, I mean, it's always difficult, isn't it, comparing two individuals in any scenario, really, because that's the meaning of the word individual, isn't it? Everyone's different. Everyone's been through different things. They've had different experiences. Do you think, so let's say there's two individuals who've had pretty much the same career history, the same experiences, but they're in different jobs, or maybe the same job, or working different jobs for the same manager, that sort of thing. And one of them is described as resilient and the other isn't. But the context of the one who isn't, and maybe they've been going through a whole load of high pressure stuff at work, the manager maybe treats them differently, or all of that. Do you think that context is like the primary difference, or is there any other aspect of it, or is it's definitely a skill to be learned, not a trait that you're born with?
I mean, it's one of those things. We're all biased negatively as human beings. It's our survival instinct. We all have this bias. And it's one of those tricky ones where some people seem to be more biased than others. It appears to be. And, I'm particularly aware of people's language because I'm coaching people, and I pick up on people who start creating narratives that are quite negative. But we're generally, and I think British people as well, so there might be some cultural things going on here as well. So I think there's an element of, is that genetic? Possibly, because we all have different balances of our hormones and our neurochemicals. And so I think, some people get more susceptible to depression, anxiety, and things like that. So and I think there's possibly some, I'm not a neuroscientist, but there's probably some genetical sort of links to that. I'm sure there is, because our brains are all wired slightly differently. And so some people, you take the example, some people are more extroverts, some people are more introverts. Excellent example. And that's just one aspect. But so I think there's a possibly an element of genetics in all this that makes people more negatively biased. So they see the problem rather than they see the opportunity. But I believe you can tilt your bias more to the positive by doing some aspects of, I do things like gratitude, creates dopamine, serotonin, makes you think more positively. Mindfulness makes you more connect to your prefrontal cortex as opposed to your amygdala, which is your fight or flight center. Celebrating wins. I do a number of those things that keep me in the place of looking for the silver lining, the opportunity. And, doesn't mean I walk through life personally thinking everything's rosy and grey and I can see the good in everything. I have a lot of moments where days I just feel a bit rubbish. And I'm explaining a lot here for a bit. And then I go into there's a few things to think about, because often people go, I don't feel great today. Well, have you eaten enough? Have you drank enough? Have you slept enough? Think about those core things first, because that can generally solve for a lot of the problems, to be honest. If that's okay, then I do things like I'll go for a walk. If I'm feeling a bit rubbish, not very positive about life, I'll go for a walk, go for a run. I'll do some gratitude practice, talk outside about what I'm grateful for at that time. And I notice it shifts me. I suddenly start feeling positive and see things, oh, this is great, that's good. And I see things more positively. So I think, going back to your question, long-winded answer, I think there's a geneticness in there as part of it, but I think you can shape it and change it.
Yeah, I'm always have been kind of fascinated by this whole nature versus nurture thing. And I mean, even the example you gave, like, so the Britishness side of it, I mean, British culture, I always find kind of hilarious, because at the one end, like, we're famous for the stiff upper lip and all of that. And then the other end, we're usually the first to complain about something. It's like, well, hang on, guys, which end of that scale do we want? Anyway, I digress. So even that, like, is it even possible to prove conclusively that is a genetic thing versus a cultural thing? Because if that's all you've ever known and that's what you've grown up with, that doesn't necessarily mean it's in your genes. It's just you think that's normal, so that's what you do.
Yeah,
so it's very difficult.
And there's probably studies out there, I'm not aware of them, probably is, that have given us a bit more insights into this. But I try to step back, and I think there's an element of who we are, who our makeup of our DNA is. Because I know, there's lots of research on certain types of people are more prone to be more depressive and anxious and stuff like that. And so I think there's an element of that, but I believe you can develop it. The key thing with all this, though, is just because somebody is not doing anything about developing their resilience, you still got to be kind to them. You still got to show empathy to them. And they may have some challenges you're not even aware of as well, that they've been battling. So I think, as much as, yes, you can say, well, you just need to be more resilient, you need to develop. Well, yes, there's an element, there's things you can do, but actually I think you've still got to be kind and empathetic to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big trap for leaders, for managers, isn't it? It's very easy to sort of pigeonhole someone, even if it's just in your own mind, and just think, oh, well, they're just not very resilient, or oh, they're just not very good at that, or, they're just not the right person for that, whatever that is. And as soon as you've done that, the trap is you've then written them off. And so in future, when things like that happen, you just say, oh, it's because of that. I don't need to think about that. I don't need to try and help them, support them. I don't need to do anything about it because it's that problem. And yeah, I mean, that applies to all sorts of things as well, doesn't it? Personal development, just leadership generally, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so interesting. So next question, I think you've started to answer it already, and you have given us a great example with the rowing team as well. But what does a resilient team look like, and what can we do as leaders, as managers, to help build one and maintain it and support those people?
I think fundamentally, a resilient team is a learning team, a team that learns together, learns from mistakes, learns from successes. That's the fundamental. But how you create that is probably the important thing. One thing I talk about a lot, and I work with a lot of teams, is building this psychological safety, where people feel safe to contribute, safe to learn themselves, to take risks, to bring challenge even to the leadership, to the status quo. And when you get a team that is incredibly psychologically safe, then you get innovation, you get new ideas, you get people taking risks. Because to be resilient, going back to my definition, you hit a challenge, you've hit a brick wall. Resilience is not just about smashing through things. That's just not how it works, really. You've got to think about how can we get over it, round it, under all that sort of stuff. And you need ideas, you need problem solving solutions and ways of working to do that. And if you're in an environment where you feel you can suggest stuff and feel okay and nobody's going to shoot you down. So that's a stupid idea. Or you're going to take a risk and, give it a go. It may fail and then you're going to be, berated for it. Then you won't. So it's the environments. So for me, that psychology of safety is quite critical within a team, to ensure you get that plethora of ideas contributing, the ability to learn, and people feel they'll sort of really be supportive of that. And then I think the other thing as I share this in my book as well, is having a team or organizational sort of purpose is quite important. And I know purpose has become a bit of a banded round word as well. But the reason I think it's really important is I'll give you an example. During COVID, I was having lots of conversations with some very distraught CEOs who didn't know what to do, and neither did I. So, we all didn't know what was going on, and we knew it was all new to everybody, and it was a funny world, funny environment. And I thought, oh well, we're all in this together, but we're all in different boats. That's the difference, wasn't it? And so this CEO I knew was quite purpose driven. And I knew they had a team mission type statement vision sort of for their organization. And I said, your team vision, I said, has anything due to what's happened with the pandemic, has that changed what it is, going forward? Because usually a purpose or a mission thing is usually far out. It's far away beyond, it's 5, 10, 20 years out. It's usually bigger than you are at the moment. And he said, no, it broadly makes that still stay the same based on what it is. I said, well, the only difference is how you do things, how you get to it, and the timing things. That's what's changed in essence. And so I suggested to him that he goes back to his team and gather them, obviously it's all on Zoom, and re-look at that purpose and look at it for inspiration, look at it to try and almost lift people's gaze from where they were at the moment, not taking them out of reality, but just taking them into look a bit to what you're there as an organization, what you're there as a team. And from that, they started to be inspired. They started to create some ideas about ways of working, how they would meet their clients, how they would get closer. And it just proliferated new ways of working and ideas. And so that team purpose became a real sort of North Star for them, really, and enabled them to guide through the pandemic and the difficulties. Didn't mean they got things right or wrong. Well, that's something that was happening as well. So that's why I really am an advocate of having that. And I'm not talking something that gets painted on a wall, or it's something that you live and breathe and becomes part of your decision-making process, becomes part of when we have challenges, part of when you just need some inspiration. And, I do a lot of things with teams. And the first thing I do is let's get what's your team purpose? What you're here to do, what you're about. And that can be a subset of your overall organization as well. So that can be really fundamental, and become your sort of North Star in how you sort of might navigate those challenges.
I think, the COVID one is a great example, isn't it? I think we all had to one way or another become more resilient, or at least more comfortable with change and uncertainty.
Mm.
And I do like your analogy at the beginning there about smashing through the wall. And it made me think of, like, if the way you look at resilience is like a health bar in a video game, then you might think, well, it just means smashing through stuff. But every time you do that, that health bar is going to go down, isn't it? And so you're so right. Mm. Like, smashing through it isn't the way to maintain your resilience or become better at that. It's looking for those innovative ways to go around the wall or over the wall or under it, or whatever that might be. Testing the metaphor now, and I probably pushed it too far. But yeah, so it was ringing bells in my head anyway, I guess, is the short way of saying that. And so coming at it from the other direction there, we've talked about what a resilient team looks like and how we can create that and maintain that. On the opposite end, then, what would you say are like the red flags or the root causes, the things we should be looking out for in a team, or even an individual, perhaps as well within a team that is struggling, or perhaps maybe a kinder way of putting it is not yet resilient enough for the challenge they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think things to look out for in a team or even an individual really is where people, when you have a challenge come your way, because resilience is only, I suppose, observed in when it's been tested, in essence. I mean, I can do lots of resilience training with people and build that into their sort of, their team dynamics. But until that test comes, you won't know. That's fundamental. And so when you have those trying times, whether that's, sales are down, or whether that's, loss of a client, or whatever it may be, or a pandemic, all those different, and it doesn't have to be huge neither, is those teams or individuals generally get quite overwhelmed with that, and motivationally, struggle with it. Their emotions can go all over the place, or sometimes that can be just going through the natural change process. But often, some people take those challenges quite personally as well. They feel it's their fault, or why is it me? Why is it happening to us as a team? Why is it happening to us as a business? And they sort of go way in within themselves. And, I think sometimes the start of resilience or becoming resilient is accepting things are how it is. It is. We're in a bad place. That's how it is. Let's accept the reality. And I think that's really important as well, because if you don't accept the reality, you'll never be able to sort of navigate out of it. And so those ones who don't accept the reality, or almost try to go above it with the positive talk and be positive about things, well, that's not going to get you through it. You still got to accept where you're at before you can move forward. That's really important. And then those teams or individuals who are also afraid to take on new ideas to try and navigate things, that always try to keep it as what we've always done before. They try and smash through the brick wall. Oh, we're just got to keep going. Keep going. Well, it's not working. Yeah, no, we're just got to keep going. Well, no, that's to me a red flag of a team that's just not resilient in how they handle things. And they just generally struggle when there's a sort of a shock to their system, and they get very deflated and can become quite negatively narrative in terms of their conversations, and it spirals even more so.
Yeah, you triggered a memory in me there. I mean, first of all, there's quite an interesting alignment there to like the stages of grief. I know it's a little bit cliche in itself, isn't it? But like the denial, the acceptance. But you triggered a memory there of when I was in a team that was facing exactly that challenge, and we had a manager who did exactly that. They went excessively positive. And I even today, like I think back to it, I'm like, did they realize they were just in complete denial about the situation, or did they think being optimistic about it was the solution? And I still don't know. I don't think I ever will. But it's an interesting, like a foible of human behaviour, I guess, isn't it? That just denial as a whole.
Well, it's a bit of a counter to not to be negatively biased and be positive. And it's like, it's like I get teams to, a slight sidetrack here, sorry. It's helpful or not, I don't know. I get teams when we create these amazing purpose statements, or they create these great ideas to overcome stuff. I always say to the end, and this sounds really negative to them, and I always preempt it with that. I say, why is this a bad idea? Why is this a bad statement? And then you see them all looking at you. We spend all morning, and then the guy's asking us why it's bad. But what it's creating is, I'm trying to create critical thinking. I'm trying to make people think of the potential flaws in it from just shifting their lens internally. That's all I'm trying to do. Because I don't think we do enough of critical thinking. We get all excited about a new idea, and we all get the emotions in the room. Off we go. Just pause a minute and say, why is this a bad idea? And I think that's sometimes appears negative, but it's not. It's being critical. And I always encourage, there's often, I could talk to a lot of leaders or peers in groups where some people feel, I'm always the one who's coming out with, the sort of, the scenarios, the what if scenarios, or, oh, we thought about this and I appear negative. But no, you're not. You're just being critical in your thinking. And it's an important part of the process to think, okay, oh, you never thought about that. That's a good idea. Let's put this in place to mitigate it. As long as you start to think about the ideas and solutions, and it's like scenario planning, basically. So, I don't know why I was going with that, but that's just, I think we've got to be mindful that just being positive about a situation doesn't help it. I say it compounds it. As you say, it's not in denial effectively. And I think there's sometimes a narrative out there that says, It's all about positive thinking. And it's just like that whole grit and determination. And I think it's unhelpful, and it's not productive in helping you get through situations.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't say this, but one of those that really winds me up is you're not coming at it with an abundant mindset. That one just really winds me up. I don't really know why it does. It just does. Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I think the critical thinking part is crucial. I think there probably is a middle ground, isn't there? I think the way you express that critical thinking and the context and the individuals that you're dealing with, you have to understand the way they're going to hear that when you say it, and you've got to couch it in the right way, because it is very easy to sound negative when you do it. You're right. But that doesn't diminish its importance, and you shouldn't not do it. And I think the other thing as well, especially in a situation like that where you've spent a day or two or weeks, months, depends on the scale of the task, I suppose, working on that solution, you get to that point, don't you, where it's you've got tunnel vision, you can't see the wood for the trees, etc. And you've spent so much time, you've invested so much into that solution. You don't want to think about what might go wrong or whether it's the right solution. It's like, no, I've done it now. I don't care if it's the right one. We're doing it, which is also very human.
Totally. And it's trying to combat that sort of group think, isn't it? When we're all locked into something. And because actually when you do that challenge of why is this a bad idea, and a bit more critical thinking, it might end up being a bad idea. Well, we've really thought it through again, or cold out light today. And I often say to some clients when they're doing that big decisions, I say, give yourself 72 hours. Don't just sleep on it one night, do 3 nights and see what you think about it, in the morning or on Saturday. And then you've processed it a little bit and you worked it through, and then think, actually, it's not a great idea, or I do need to build upon this or change it. So again, sometimes just pausing a little bit rather than racing ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And harking back to something you said a bit earlier as well, I think the real trick to that is applying that critical thought, maybe even being a little bit negative about an idea early enough that you don't go down the wrong path and spend ages developing or creating a solution that is the wrong one, but not so early that you kill the good ideas. And that is something I've always struggled with. I don't know about you. Is where is that tipping point? Where's the right moment to do it?
Yeah, because you want those ideas to flourish, to do brainstorming, or I don't know if you can call it brainstorming anymore, but and you want no judgment on that. You want it all to go out there, but it's that sort of funneling process, isn't it? But then before we finalize that funnel, it's almost going in again, isn't it? And yes, it's not easy, and some people find critical thinking more easy than others. And I always like that it's usually the quiet ones in the room who've not said a word, who are the ones basically thinking, usually the introverts. And in a group, I'll say, so-and-so, what do you think? And they go, well, and then you come out with this amazing insight that nobody's ever thought of, because they've been thinking about it. They're not, everybody else, the extroverts have all been talking and not been listening to themselves or each other. I think it's making sure that you get everybody to contribute in the room as well. And that's a skill in itself, because you don't want to force people, but you want to give that environment where people can all contribute, share. Yeah,
that is an especially tricky one. And I think I've come to see the extrovert and introvert scale as it's not so much about whether they're speaking or listening or not listening. I think it's more about the way their mind processes, the way they think. So extroverts think verbally quite a lot of the time, whereas introverts is very sort of introspective, hence the word introvert. And one thing I find really difficult, both having been an introvert in that situation, but also trying to lead others, is creating or finding that space where they do feel comfortable to share those key thoughts. Because sometimes you put them on the spot in a meeting and they say, no, I don't have anything to say. Or they shake their head and say nothing. And actually what you've done is draw attention to the fact that they're not comfortable talking in a room full of people. So that can be really difficult as well. And I think, and again, it's a classic trap of leadership, is assuming that because you've said, does anyone else have any thoughts or anything they want to say, and nobody says anything, that means they don't have anything to raise. They don't have any other points to make.
Yeah.
It might just be they're not comfortable saying it in front of a whole group of people. What is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
There's been many. Trying to think about this.
You do top 3 if you like.
I've really learned that people's emotions matter, and it sounds really, what does that really mean? Actually, it's okay to have emotions, whether visibly or not, and just being attuned to those emotions and state of people. And I've always been quite intuitive about reading people, in terms of when they come into a room, you can sense if they're flat, excited, you just pick it up. And I suppose later on, I learned a lot more about that, in terms of being body language and everything else, and just being more mindful of that. And I think that's been quite a big lesson for me. And I wish I'd learned that earlier. I've been observant of, whether that's in teams or customer clients type of thing, being more aware of almost what's been going on in their world beforehand, and just being a matter in the context of emotions. I also have learned that's probably more, I've always led in more of an authentic leadership type of point of way. Again, another buzzword out there, but there's a lot of research about authenticity. And my sort of definition is somebody who is really self-aware, got transparency in how they operate, they have balanced processing in terms of involving people in decision making, and they got a sort of moral compass in essence. I've always had that, but my awareness of it was probably later on in life. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things I've been sort of doing it, but I wish I'd learned more about it. And, realizing that actually, certainly in teams, that transparency is so valuable. And I wish I was probably more transparent, as I've led teams. I think I probably fell into the trap that we talked about before where, I just positives carry on or dampen down those sort of negative talk and things like that, but actually be more transparent about the situation. I remember when I was leading a commercial team for Yoplait actually, and we had a yogurt business. We had a French strike for 3 weeks, so we had no stock for 3 weeks. A £200 million business, supplying all the major retails and wholesale in the UK. And I think the lesson I learned in all that was transparency. I learned it very quickly in terms of sharing the team, where we're at, what's happening, being real and honest as well. I really was open and honest about it. And this was my authenticity coming through. I said, look, sometimes I'd ask questions and I go, I don't know. And it was probably my biggest pivotal moment of learning, of leadership in a crisis effectively. I've never done crisis management at all, but I was deep in it. But I realized actually being open about, what was going on, what was not going on, what I knew, what I didn't know, was incredibly valuable. And I think got a lot of team kudos. It was still quite difficult, in terms of doing that. But I also had this almost using the team. I got a supply chain team as well, almost like saying, look, do you know what? I didn't say it quite like this, but I'm not entirely sure how we're navigating this, but I need some help. What are your ideas and how we might go about this? So there's elements of leadership and me sort of saying some thoughts of approach, but actually I was saying, what else can we do to try and navigate this? Because I'm feeling a little bit essentially out of my depth, really. And so I did invoke a little bit of the team, and I suppose I wish I'd learned that probably earlier on as well. But yeah, that's one of my biggest lessons, really. And I share a lot about that in the context of my book as well, about that whole moment. It's 3 weeks, but it was like 6 weeks before we all sort of came back to normal. And it was, pretty intense for that time. Very intense.
I can imagine. Yeah. I think it's one of those things, isn't it? The buzzword being over authenticity, that slight vulnerability as well, and the transparency, the honesty. I think they matter so much more when things are difficult and when it's harder to do them as well. So in situations like that, where the natural response is, I can't tell people this, what are they going to think? they're all going to start looking for a job. They're all going to panic about paying the mortgage, etc. And so that's the sort of the instinctual response, I think, for most leaders, even ones who are sort of self-aware and like to lead authentically. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, "Oh, should I do this?" and then there's things like the ego and the pride of it as well, and it can be so difficult for people to just say an honest thing in a situation like that. And I think what's always helped me is one of the earliest leadership lessons I was ever actually taught was exactly what you've just described as part of your story there, which is if you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer. Don't try and bluff it out. Don't make something up. You'll get caught and then you've lost your credibility. It's much, much better to just say, look, I don't know the answer right now. And then as soon as that conversation's over, go and find the answer and then come back and tell them. Like follow up, follow through, all of that sort of stuff.
Mm.
And that one's always, I wouldn't say it's kept me out of trouble, but it's stood me in good stead. Let's say it that way. And I think, yeah, it's so difficult to do though, and do it well. From the perspective of being a follower and a leader that you've worked with or for, and you don't have to name names unless you really want to. It's up to you. What would you say have been your best and worst experiences of leadership from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of good and bad and ugly along the way as well. I suppose my best place of, well, it was at Yoplait, surprisingly, in terms of the leadership there. And the reason was, I felt incredibly empowered. Well, I was the commercial director, so I had quite a big role as well, but you know, my MD was incredibly empowering of what I did and how I went about things. You know, there was lots of collaboration, lots of sort of quite short accounts of chats, what was going on, and that was really very highly motivational for me. I felt a sense of real trust in how I did things, and we tried things. We tried some ways of getting things to market quickly, and it took some risks, but we took it as a together type risks. It wasn't just, oh, I'm just taking the risk. You know, we launched a brand, called Liberté that was, it's a French product that was being manufactured in Canada. So we were flying this product in. It cost an absolute fortune. And we launched it. I think it was in Sainsbury's first, quite quickly actually. But there's a big risk to that in terms of costs. And we all share, but that's sort of business I like to be part of and how it was led. And it was very entrepreneurial as well, even though it was quite a big business, had a real, agility to it all. So that was almost probably my best and where I thrived and enjoyed and probably, yeah, they got the best out of me in that sort of context. In terms of my worst, I've had a number of those, but I won't name them, obviously. But in terms of, and it goes back to this thing I talked about, psychological safety, where I probably didn't feel very psychologically safe, whether that's to challenge some of the thinking of the senior leadership of where we were going, the direction, where I could feel sort of vulnerable and take some risks. I've had a number of bosses who they role model very poor sort of micromanagement sort of environments where you almost felt you had to micromanage, but I don't micromanage. And then they would say, why are you not doing this, and this, that person? It almost like telling mindset, and it just didn't resonate with me at all, and found it completely inhibited my growth of who I was. So yeah, that was an environment that wasn't great. And so yeah, but you know, in fairness, I look back at those moments of when it was bad and say, okay, how could I, learn from that? And it's, it is that learning piece, even though it was pretty bad. What can I learn from that for my own leadership, for what I do now? And so having experienced that, and I think it's important, I work with leaders, who experience all this, the good and the bad. And so, not that I share all what I've done, but it's good to have an appreciation of environments which are toxic, and environments which are great for thriving as well. And so I think it's to have that appreciation. But yeah, no, that would be my best and my worst.
What's interesting, but maybe not surprising, is the polar opposite contrast between those two. Like the reason it was the worst was because of that micromanaging aspect of it. The reason this one was the best was because I felt empowered and supported.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I've even come to, I use the word empowered, but enables the word I probably use now, because I think sometimes empowering, I love empowering, I think the concept it all, but it feels, when you think about it, it's like somebody's got some power and they're going to give some power to you. And it's not quite like that, really. So I think for me, and I talk a lot more about enabling, actually. And so it's enabling somebody to go off and do stuff and grow and take risks and do stuff. And that's far more, what's the better word that describes it without you've got some power to give to somebody.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also think empowered, I use it way too much. I know I do, because I've not thought of a better word for what I'm trying to explain, and everyone knows what it means. But it's another one of those words I feel like is being hijacked by the influencer culture and social media side of it. But anyway, yeah. And you're right. I mean, power dynamics, that whole thing. Like if you're in leadership and you think power is the word, you shouldn't be in leadership. So yeah, totally agree with you. And I love enable. That is a much better word. I agree with you. I'm going to steal that.
I stole it from somebody else, so that's fine.
Brilliant. There we go. I won't feel bad then.
I'd steal loads of things like that.
Yeah. I think when they're just generic words like that you could find in the dictionary, I think it's not really stealing, is it? Pretty sure. Oh well. If you could go back in time then to the start of your career, what advice would you give to your younger self?
It's a funny old question, isn't it, sometimes? I think I would tell my younger self to get clearer on my purpose sooner than I did. And because I found having clarity of my purpose has been really helpful, certainly from a context of my business, what I do. And I've had, obviously, when I look back, I've had moments when I know I've been aligned to my purpose, but probably didn't realize it, because obviously it's sort of with us. And even though purposes evolve a little bit anyway, I think you never know fully what it might be, I think, until you step into things as you go forward. But I wish I'd perhaps known a bit more awareness of that earlier on. Because, and I go back to COVID, my business dropped by, in that COVID year, 65%. It sort of plummeted, as did a lot of businesses, and some people grew the other way around, depending on what you were supplying and your service and everything else. And I remember, it was tough to try and, get up and basically have no clients for a period of time. And so I would wake up, remind myself of my purpose to unlock human potential and create resilient cultures and mindsets within people, teams and organizations. And then I started to use that as a source of inspiration. And I started to use, I questioned and said, okay, how can I today unlock some human potential? How can I today create resilient cultures and all that sort of stuff? And that sparked, along with my daily walks that we were allowed to do, sparked ideas. I created a resilience online course. I started to connect with people and do complimentary resilience training. And I did a whole stuff like that. And as much as financially there was no gain, but I was gaining experience, insight. I was connecting with people, and I felt I was fulfilling a purpose, and I was quite in a good place, actually, surprisingly, weirdly, without the finance. It wasn't great, but, and so that helped me navigate that really tough challenge, but also gave me some real sense of meaning, beyond the money and jobs and all that sort of stuff. And so, I think back, if I'd known that sooner, might have navigated other challenges probably better, potentially. So that would be, for me, would be quite important to have known earlier on.
Yeah, I like that. I think for me, it'd be something similar, but maybe to do with the values part rather than the purpose. Because I think values is another tricky one, isn't it? I think most people know what they are sort of deep down, but maybe we don't really think about it in the day to day. But there have been times where I know in hindsight the reason why I was so unhappy with a job or a workplace or a situation was because it was counter to the values, the things that were important to me. And I wish I'd thought about that earlier, because then I wouldn't have suffered in that situation as long as I did. I would have just removed myself from it far sooner. So very, very similar, I think, maybe from a slightly less positive point of view. But I agree with you on the purpose side of it as well. I think that can be so powerful, especially when you're a business of one and you're operating on your own, and when you're going through something like COVID and you're like literally isolated as well as figuratively. It is important, I think, to have something to sort of hang your hat on of why am I getting out of bed this morning? What am I going to achieve? What am I here to do? What is the business for? All of those things. And if you don't have that, it's so easy to just lose that direction, lose that, purpose, obviously, but lose that will to carry on with the business even.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Good story as well. We've only got one question left. My favourite one of all. They're all my favourites, but this is my top favourite. It's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you like, so like alive or dead, past, present, real, fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
I have to give some thought to this one. And I came up with, it's an interesting one. And I didn't at the time realize I went to a conference or a seminar. There was like, it was in London. And I was in my late 20s. So 25 odd years ago. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know who I was meeting. And it was this room, must have been 200 or 300 people. We're all sat on these sort of round tables. And it was Stephen Covey. And that was the first sort of time I knew of him, met him, and he just talked. And it's interesting. He didn't talk in the context of on a stage, actually. He walked around the room talking, which was really interesting. I thought he was incredibly interactive and immersive in that. And then we'd pick people out and he would talk them and he'd do some, interaction with people. And I found that incredibly sort of fascinating and inspiring and just get understanding. And I started to learn more about obviously the 7 habits, which, almost seems like really old stuff now, but actually there's some good stuff in the 7 habits. And one that's really stuck with me, I've really, has helped me think as a person is the one about seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think that's, and I think we're in a time where we're going so fast with people. We don't give time to really understand people. We just want to get our opinion across. And I think for me, it was a habit that I started early on where I would literally sometimes go into it. And I do obviously with my coaching now, where I will listen without any judgment, no ideas what I want to, how to respond until I've heard all what they've said, until I've understood it. And then I'll respond, or ask a question, whatever. But it's something that's become quite a thing for me. And I get frustrated sometimes when I interact with people and they just literally, they just talk about themselves. They don't even ask about me, and not that it's about me, but did have a conversation. There's an open dialogue. And I think, one of those funny moments where I didn't even know the person and I would turn up and then this guy and then read his book. And obviously there's other sort of, habits, there's the begin with the end in mind, all stuff we sort of know now. But I think it's going to be proactive, put the first things first, all these things. And I think, for me, pretty inspiring. And I think he's dead now. But yeah, and I think it's just that habits has really helped my leadership.
I know exactly what you mean. And you see it quite a lot in networking events, I find, where everyone's they're there to talk about their pitch and their thing, and they're clearly not listening to you. But I think it's also something leaders do a lot as well. Or bad leaders. Bad is probably unfair. Leaders who are maybe not thinking about it, let's say that. The ones who are playing on their phone when you're talking to them, that sort of leader manager. It's so fundamental, I think, to not just leadership, but just being a good person that people want to interact with. Nobody wants to interact or deal with someone who and we do pick up on it. It's immediately obvious if they're just there to talk about themselves and they're not really listening to what you say. And I think the first clue for me is always like how long into the conversation before they ask you a question. If it's more than like 5 or 10 minutes, that's probably a red flag. Like sweeping generalization, right?
I get really curious because that's who I am, and that's nature of why I'm a coach, I guess. But I'll ask loads of questions to people, and I really get an understanding. And I think sometimes I probably exhaust people for them to come back on a question to me.
Yeah, that's fair. It's probably possible to go too far the other way as well, isn't it? Yeah, that's a good note. Yeah.
But it's the intention of that habit I like, is that seek first, understand, and then and it's the intentional piece. And I think it's important to, it's funny when I go to networking events, my intentions, I have two intentions, is to connect with people, and see if I can help them. They're my two intentions. I don't go with, can I get a client? Can I get a lead? No, I just want to connect with people, get to know them, and see if I can help them. That is it. And I go with those intentions, and I think it comes across better that way. And because your intentions reflect your language, your body language, your tone, what you say, everything else. So it's really important to set the right intentions.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the networking is just the first example that popped to my mind, but I think for relevant and contextual one, it would be like the one-to-one that you're having with someone in your team. Again, like if you go in, and I almost feel like the leader shouldn't speak first, but I guess if you have to ask the question that starts the conversation, that's maybe not practical, but you've got to go in with that mindset if you want to understand where they're coming from right now. Like what is the challenge they're facing this week? What are they worried about? Where do they need that support from you? And less about, I've got to fill in the form to say we've done the one-to-one, for example. Lovely. Well, thank you for that, Julian. I think you get bonus points as well, because no one's picked that hero before. So well done on that as well.
Well, I'm always for bonus points, David.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone gets them. We've had quite a lot of Abraham Lincoln, quite a few Jesuses. Captain Picard comes up a lot as well from Star Trek. But we've never had Mr. Covey before. So yeah, well done. Well done. And also way more interesting and meaningful because you've actually met the person. So that's even better.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't realise who he was at the time, to be honest. That was a weird thing.
Yeah. Still counts.
It's more of a reflective way of meeting. It still counts. Yeah, no.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Julian, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have as well. I will ask you one more small little question, which is if any of the listeners or viewers would like to know more about you, perhaps get a copy of that book, where can they go? What's the website, etc.?
Go on LinkedIn, Julian Roberts. You'll see me posting on there, and it's quite helpful. The easy way to find people, or julianrobertsconsulting.com. All my stuff's on there, and there's links to the book on there and also on LinkedIn. And to say that I've really enjoyed this conversation as well, David. Really been quite thought-provoking for me as well. It's what I love about these podcast conversations is making me think about things differently to my own perspective and perhaps learn something new about myself.
Well, I'm pleased you enjoyed it too. And yeah, that's it really. Have a great rest of your week. And yeah, all the best for 2025.
Yeah, you too, David. Thank you.
Thank you again, Julian, for a lovely conversation. We covered all sorts of things there, and hopefully we were more positive than we were negative. I think we were anyway. Thank you so much for your time. Listener or viewer, if you're with us on YouTube or now Spotify as well, also lets me do video now, which is great news. Anyway, so yeah, whether you're listening or viewing and you'd like to learn more about Julian and his work and hopefully buy a copy of his book, you will find the website in the show notes below. as well as his LinkedIn profile as well. So click on those, reach out to him, get a copy of that book, send him a message, ask him questions. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And if any of the leadership lessons that we've talked about today have struck a chord with you and you'd like to get access to other leadership materials, early access to these podcast episodes, and benefit from a community of like-minded leaders just like you who are new to leadership, new to management, do come along and join us at the Integrity Leaders online leadership community. Again, you will find the link down below. Click on that green button, come and join us today. And don't forget, you can use a listener or viewer exclusive discount code to get 50% off your membership forever. And that is half off 24. That's it from me today. Thank you again so much for being with us. I hope you'll join me again next week for the next episode in this short series on building resilient teams. Until then, be a leader, not a boss.